The streets were silent except for the faint hum of streetlights and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Midnight had a way of stripping the city bare. No traffic jams, no clattering heels on sidewalks, no boardroom power plays, just shadows stretching across pavement. Adrian Holt gripped the steering wheel of his battered sedan, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He was a single dad barely holding things together, working 2 jobs and still falling behind on rent. He often told himself he could endure anything as long as his 8-year-old daughter Mia had food on the table and a safe bed to sleep in. But that night, he had no idea his life was about to collide with fate in a way that would change everything. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that prove the human heart is stronger than we think, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Kindness Journal, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Adrian was returning from a late night delivery shift when his headlights caught the staggering figure of a woman near the curb outside an upscale downtown lounge. Her high heels clicked unevenly against the sidewalk, one hand clutching her purse, while the other tried to steady herself against the building's glass wall. She looked fragile in that moment, her expensive navy blue suit wrinkled and her glossy hair falling from its tight bun. And then Adrian's heart sank. He recognized her immediately. It was Victoria Hale, his boss, the CEO of the very company where he worked as a low-level technician. She was known throughout the office for being sharp, fearless, and at times intimidating. Employees whispered about her fiery boardroom speeches and merciless standards. Yet here she was, drunk and vulnerable, wobbling in the middle of a near-empty street. Adrian pulled over before his mind could even argue with his heart. He approached her cautiously. She barely noticed him at first, mumbling something about needing her car. Her keys dangled dangerously from her fingers, and Adrian realized with a chill that she had been about to drive. The thought of a woman so powerful and untouchable risking her life in this state made his chest tighten. Without thinking twice, he gently took the keys from her trembling hand. She tried to protest but stumbled forward, and Adrian caught her before she could hit the pavement. He guided her carefully into his car, aware of the irony. Him, a struggling single dad in worn-out clothes, was suddenly the protector of the woman who signed his paychecks and whose world seemed galaxies away from his own. As he drove, she slumped against the seat, whispering incoherent fragments about her life, things that sounded less like power and more like pain. "I can't hold it together anymore," she muttered, before slipping into silence. Adrian didn't take her to some sterile hotel or back to the office. Instead, against every instinct that told him this was reckless, he drove her to his own modest apartment. Mia was asleep on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Adrian laid a blanket over her, then helped Victoria to his small bedroom. She looked out of place there, the queen of skyscrapers surrounded by peeling paint, faded curtains, and furniture bought secondhand. But there was safety in that space, a kind of warmth she clearly needed. He made sure she had water beside the bed, left the door ajar for air, and stayed up most of the night in the living room, watching his daughter breathe peacefully while listening for any sound from the other room. He thought about the cruel twists of life. One day you're invisible to someone, just another face in their company. The next, fate drops them into your world in the most human, fragile state possible. When morning light poured through the window, Adrian braced himself. He expected anger, humiliation, maybe even threats. CEOs didn't like appearing weak, especially not in front of employees. But when Victoria emerged, she wasn't the towering figure everyone feared. Her eyes were swollen, not from alcohol alone, but from the weight she carried inside. She looked at Mia first, then at the tidy breakfast Adrian had prepared, scrambled eggs and toast, because that was all he could afford. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost disbelievingly, she asked, "Why did you help me?" Adrian hesitated. He could have said he feared losing his job if she'd been arrested. He could have said he didn't know what else to do. But the truth spilled out simply. "Because you needed someone. And I know what it feels like to need someone and have no one show up." Victoria sat down slowly, her expression unreadable. She took a bite of toast, her hands trembling slightly, and then tears. Not the polished kind you wipe away quickly, but the raw kind that makes your whole body shake. Adrian felt awkward at first, unsure if he should comfort her, but then she began to speak. She confessed that behind her hard reputation, she lived in loneliness. She'd poured her life into building her empire, sacrificing friendships, family ties, even her marriage, only to realize she had no one to call at midnight when the walls closed in. Success, she admitted, felt like a prison. Adrian listened, his heart aching. He thought of Maya and how her laughter was the only thing keeping him from crumbling. He thought of his late wife, who had died too young, leaving him to juggle grief with fatherhood. Maybe in that cramped kitchen, two broken worlds had collided not by accident, but by design. The hours after breakfast unfolded like something Adrian couldn't have scripted. Victoria insisted on helping Mia with her homework, fumbling adorably through math problems she hadn't touched in decades. Mia, unfiltered and innocent, asked if Miss Lady Boss wanted to stay for lunch too. For the first time Adrian could remember, he saw Victoria laugh. Not the corporate chuckle she used in meetings, but a genuine laugh that softened her entire face. Still, Adrian braced for the aftermath. Surely once she returned to her world of wealth and glass towers, she would pretend none of this had happened. Maybe she'd even punish him for daring to see her in weakness. But he was wrong. The next week at the office, whispers spread quickly. Victoria Hale, the untouchable CEO, walked into the building not with her usual clipped stride, but with a quiet calm. At the staff meeting, she did something unthinkable. She openly thanked Adrian in front of everyone. She didn't reveal the full story, but she said he had shown her what true leadership looked like. Not power, not intimidation, but compassion. Gasps rippled through the room, jaws dropped, and Adrian felt his ears burn. He wanted to sink into the floor, but Victoria's gaze held steady, her voice unwavering. From that day on, something shifted. She began implementing new policies for employee wellness, shorter work hours for parents, and emergency funds for staff in crisis. She started walking through the lower floors of the company, speaking to people she'd once ignored. And at the center of it all, Adrian stood quietly, never boasting, never asking for recognition. But the most shocking part wasn't what happened at the office. It was what happened outside of it. Victoria began visiting Adrian and Mia regularly. Sometimes she'd bring groceries. Sometimes she'd help Maya with school projects. Other times she'd just sit in Adrian's worn living room, sipping coffee as if she belonged there. Slowly, the icy barrier of status melted away. She wasn't CEO Hale anymore. She was simply Victoria, human, vulnerable, healing. One evening, months later, Adrian found Mia asleep on Victoria's lap as they sat together on the couch. Victoria looked at him, her eyes soft but serious. "You saved me that night," she whispered. "Not just from the street, but from myself." Adrian didn't know what to say. He only knew that sometimes life gave second chances in the most unexpected ways, and so a single dad who once thought he had nothing to offer became the lifeline to a woman who seemed to have everything. Their worlds collided not in a boardroom, not in a contract, but in the raw space of midnight vulnerability. It was proof that kindness doesn't need status or wealth, it just needs courage. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion has the power to change lives. And before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever been helped by someone you least expected? Your story might inspire someone else to believe in kindness today. Because sometimes saving someone isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up when the world is asleep, when no one else will. Just like Adrian did.